So, welcome to chapter 13, which is talking about the neoclassical perspective. So, neoclassical is the philosophy that in the long run, the business cycle will fluctuate around the potential or full employment level of output. So, the basic idea here, when we're talking about the neoclassical method, is that it's taking a new look at the classical method. So back in the old days, when we're looking at economics, which was the classical economics, the idea was that we should just have like a market economy. So no government, we don't need them at all. If there was a change in price over here, it will change something over here, which would regulate this over here. So basically, the idea was that if there was inflation, such as people buying so much stuff, then supply would change and bring us back to the full employment output automatically. But this idea changed around the Great Depression era. So basically, the classical method said, okay, if there is a recession, so people are buying less things, then supply would lower prices, and then people would say, oh, things are cheaper now, let me buy things and let me increase the output, and then we're back to the long run equilibrium. When this didn't happen and we stayed in a recession for a very long time, then we had to take a new look at this. We had to see, is government involved? So that's where the Keynesian idea came into play, where it's like, oh, maybe we do need some government involvement. So neoclassical is going to be taking that same idea on classical economics, but it's going to be applying some sort of government intervention in there. So classical method had zero government, but neoclassical is going to have some government intervention in there. Okay? So let's talk about the building blocks to get there. So we need to look at the potential GDP, determining the economy size, and then we need to look at how wages and prices will adjust to bring us back to the potential GDP. So we need to remember the long run GDP. Remember, that is your potential. That is this point right here, where you have your aggregate demand, your short run aggregate supply curve, and your long run aggregate supply curve. So this right here, this long run, is what we're talking about as your YF. This is your potential GDP, where you are using all of your resources and you have zero cyclical unemployment. You are at your natural rate of unemployment. If you have zero cyclical unemployment, then you are at your natural rate of unemployment. Okay. Economists benchmark actual or real GDP against the potential GDP to determine how well the economy is performing. So we actually calculate this. We actually use Fred to collect the data, and we can actually look at this in real time, and we can see the difference between where we actually are and the potential. I'll show you what that looks like in a second. But what we need to do here is we do need to look at some sort of government involvement. So we talked about in chapter 7 about how we can contribute to economic growth. One of those would be seeing increases in investment into capital, and another one would be increases in human capital. Remember, human capital is your knowledge and skills being used in the economy. So, like you going to school, that's increasing your human capital. By you getting certifications to operate a crane or a forklift, that is contributing to your human capital. You're able to do more things. And so another thing we can look at is a change in technology. So investing into physical capital per person, the amount of machinery available to help people produce a good or service, this would be a good thing to invest in to really increase potential GDP, as well as the increasing in human capital, such as basically having more available vocational schools. So maybe more continuing education programs, or maybe more on-the-job training, or free tuition might be an example of how the government is trying to increase the human capital. So these would be a great way to increase productivity, and by increasing productivity, you could increase GDP. So that's how government could get involved here, in the sense of contributing to that long-term GDP growth. So here's what I was talking about, where we have the data and we can look at potential and the actual. So the potential is looking at all the factors that we have, all of our resources, okay? And it's a calculation, it's an estimation of basically what could our GDP be if we had zero cyclical unemployment, if we used all of our resources, this would be our potential GDP. So that's this right here, this solid line, that is your potential GDP. The dotted line is the real GDP. So this is what actually happened. And as you can see here, the actual is fluctuating around the potential. Sometimes it does go above, like in the 90s. It did go above there. It did go below here. This is when we had the Great Recession. And it stayed below there until finally in 2019 when it got right back to the potential. So good things were happening. And then COVID happened to where we actually had another decrease. So we were actually way well below our potential. But this is what actually is going on. So economists are always trying to estimate the potential, and then we can also look at the actual data going on as well. So this vertical aggregate supply curve is going to be very, very important in the neoclassical perspective. Everything is going to be based around here. The vertical aggregate supply curve. It is determining the real full employment output. No matter where we draw the aggregate demand, no matter where it is, your full employment output is right here. Over time, we could change the long-run aggregate supply curve, such as more technology, more human capital, more physical capital, and those could change your potential, which could change your long-run aggregate supply curve. But a change in aggregate demand has no change in output. Very important there. If we change aggregate demand, the real output does not change. Okay. Now, the reason that basically this is not changing is because of the role of flexible prices. So with Keynesian idea, he said prices are sticky. So if something happens in the economy and this is going to change the equilibrium, your wage doesn't change overnight. Neoclassical perspective says, well, what if it did? What if your wages changed automatically, and then this also this also changed the input prices automatically? So flexible prices is basically that even if wages and prices are sticky in the short run, they are flexible over time. Okay, so basically it's like, what if they could change? What would happen next? So an economy may produce above its level of potential GDP in the short run due to aggregate demand changing. But what's going to happen here is that your prices are going to change, and this will change your supply, and guess what? It's going to end up right back at your full employment output. So basically, no matter what happens over the long run, even if we change the aggregate demand, this is still going to end up at the full employment output. A surge in aggregate demand ends up as an increase in prices and not a rise in output. So let's go through this right here. So here is the flow. Here is the idea of neoclassical economics. So number one, we are going to start at E0. E0 is just the equilibrium between the short run, aggregate demand, and the long run. So E0. That's all it is. Okay? Now, let's say there was an increase in aggregate demand. So now we're at AD1. This creates a new equilibrium. Okay, so now we're on AD1 and SRAS0. Supply did not change. So now we're at E1. Okay, so what happened with E1? Well, we had an increase in prices, right? So price is higher. Okay? So the new E1 has a higher level of output and price level. When there is an increase in output, the neoclassical idea was like, okay, we need more people, we need to hire more people. So the employers are like, let's pay people more money, so we can get more employees. If we increase the wage, then we're also going to start using more resources. This is going to increase wage, increase input prices. And this will decrease the short-run average supply curve. So basically, it's like we need more people. So let's hire more people. This is going to increase wages. Eventually, firms are going to say, this is too expensive. We need to make less stuff. So they're going to decrease the supply. So this will decrease the supply to SRAS 1. So now you're at right here. You are at the intersection between AD1 and SRAS 1. So this new equilibrium right here, E2, this is your new equilibrium. So you started at E0 right here in green. And now, after a change in demand and a change in supply, you ended up at E2. So let's compare the two. So this is E0. You have a price level of 118. So price level in this case could be CPI. So your CPI could be 118. Now, if you have a change in demand and this changes supply, this is going to put you at E2. And what about E2? Well, now your price level is 130, but did your output change? Look at E0 and look at E1. Your output stayed the same. Okay? So that's the thing about neoclassical, is that no matter what happens in the economy, in the long run, you will always come back to the long run equilibrium. You will always come back to the full employment output. You will always come back to the long run average supply curve. Okay? So notice how we were at E1, which caused the inflationary gap. Automatically, the economy is going to adjust to where you're going to end up right back at the full employment output. So that's with an increase in demand. Let's talk about a decrease in demand. So here's the flow now. We're going to start at E0, which is at your potential GDP. Okay, so you're at your long run equilibrium, AD0, SRAS0, and your long run supply. So that happens right here at E0. Then, because of a change in the demand, such as a decrease in demand, this is going to change to where you are now at E1. If you're at E1, all right, what happened here is your prices go down and your output goes down. See how we were at E0 and now we're at E1? Your prices and your output are decreasing. When output is down, you need less people, more unemployment. Because unemployment is higher, wages will be lower. So as a firm, you could hire more people. And so what you will do is you will hire more people, increase the output, which increases the supply. So therefore, you are now at E2. Okay? So what happened here? You were at E0, but after a change in demand, which then changed supply, this will change you back to E2. So what happened to prices? We went from 120 CPI to 110. So prices are lower, but did your output change? No. Your output did not change. It's still at 500. So that's the whole thing about the neoclassical, is that no matter what happens, you end up right back at your long run supply curve, which is at 500. You always end up at your full employment output. Always. So in the next video, we'll continue talking about the neoclassical perspective. But the main thing I really want you to understand in this video is that your long run average supply curve, right here, this vertical supply curve, everything will happen, but in the long run, it comes right back to the full employment output on its own. With the Keynesian, we would need government spending in order to change demand to get us to full employment output. But neoclassical says, nope, if we had a change in demand, supply would adjust back to the full employment output. So that's the difference. All right, I'll see you in the next one. Bye.